What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It is your boy Kevin Forte coming to you today with a video about the Las Vegas Golden Knights. Guys, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Let's get into today's video on the Golden Knights. So, the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously, they're trying to defend their cup aspirations. They won the Stanley Cup last year, and they're looking to win it again. And based off how their season has gone so far, they are projected to be right toward the top of the NHL standings and hopefully in the conversation for winning the Stanley Cup. But with the way that the standings are right now, it's kind of interesting to see where the Golden Knights sit, because you would think with what they did at the deadline and everything else, they'd be in the running for the President's Trophy. Not necessarily the case this year in Las Vegas. This team currently sits fourth in the Pacific Division, tied for third in technicality with the Los Angeles Kings, but because of games in hand, they currently sit fourth in the division. Not really what we expected. And what's even more interesting is they're 6 points behind Edmonton for second in the division, and they're, what is that? I'm not good at math. I am not a math guy. They are 15 points back of first place in their own division, which is the Vancouver Canucks, sitting with 92 points. So based off of that alone, that should tell you a lot about where we think of Vegas is. Yeah, this is a team that looks like a fringe team based off of standings, but we know in the practicality and the reality of things, as long as Vegas gets into the playoffs, this is a team to watch for, and they are going to be a threat this season in the postseason. So looking at their current injuries right now, so they've got three big injuries. You're without Mark Stone, Alec Martinez, and Tomas Hertl. So all three of those guys are out. We're hoping to see them come back at some point. So Mark Stone will not return during the regular season, which probably means he'll be back for the playoffs. Nothing new there. Alec Martinez has been placed on injured reserve. That was back 2 weeks ago in March 6th. And then, of course, Tomas Hertl, newly acquired Tomas Hertl, has been out since February. So all three of those guys are on injured reserve. And the technicality of the salary cap situation probably implies we likely won't see all three of those guys suiting up for the rest of the regular season, and most likely Mark Stone being the most likely of the three. Leading the way in points is Jonathan Marchessault, Mark Stone, who's out, Jack Eichel, and William Karlsson. So the typical guys you would expect at the top for the Golden Knights. Now, looking at their lineup right now, it's kind of easy to see this team as a team that you expect to win a lot of hockey games, right? This is a team that's built like a playoff team, but you look at their record really since the end of February, things have not really gone well for this team. And the only winning streak they've had, they've had two back-to-back game winning streaks since, when is that? Since January, the end of January, where they played the Islanders and the Rangers. So since then, they've only had two back-to-back times where they've won two consecutive games in a row. That doesn't happen very often in Vegas. They have not had a three-game winning streak since January, and that's where the concern is kind of for this team. They currently just broke a four-game losing streak right going into the trade deadline. They won two games, and now they've lost again to Calgary, a team that they really should have beaten. A Calgary team that is not playing well, that is sold off at the deadline, traded one of their players, which we'll talk about in a minute, Noah Hanifin. There's no reason they should be losing to a team like Calgary. And the schedule doesn't really get much more difficult, but it gets more difficult with some of the teams that maybe you would expect to be easy wins, maybe not being as easy as you would think. Perfect example, their next game, the New Jersey Devils, right? The Devils just beat the brakes off of, who did they beat? I think they won 6-3 the other night. They play Tampa, Seattle, Columbus, St. Louis, Nashville, Winnipeg. So there's a couple of easier teams, and then there's a couple of tougher teams in that mix. Like, you play Minnesota, Arizona, Nashville, Chicago, Anaheim. Those are teams that are struggling. Those should be points. That should be an easy, 6 or 7 wins right there for the Golden Knights with the expectations and the aspirations they have this season. But then you do have some games like Edmonton, Colorado, 2 games against Vancouver, St. Louis, Winnipeg. like we mentioned, Tampa Bay. So there is a couple of tough games in there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where Vegas kind of finishes out. A lot of teams are probably in that division and the Western Conference probably thinking, if you win the Central Division and you get a wild card team that you have to play, that actually might be worse than playing as the 2 or 3 seed in the first round of the playoffs. Because if you're the number 1 seed in the Central, you might have to play Vegas as the second wild card team or the first wild card team, depending on how things kind of play out. And that kind of sucks. Your reward is playing Vegas in the first round, and that could be kind of an interesting scenario that we'll probably talk about once we get closer to the postseason. But with the way this team is playing right now, they had to make some moves. And 2 of the big moves, which really are going to be the focus of today's video, are Noah Hanifin and, of course, the bringing in of some forward help, which they desperately needed. I mean, you look at some of the moves that they made, those are obviously the 2 biggest ones, being Anthony Mantha and Noah Hanifin. Anthony Mantha came in, he's already got a goal for Vegas. That's great to see. And then you're looking at Hanifin. Hanifin plays a much different game than Mantha up front, right? Mantha is a tough guy. He's a big guy. I think he just needed a little bit of motivation, and maybe getting traded was the best thing for Mantha, and I think it kind of was a win-win for everybody, right? It's a win for Vegas because they get another big body in there that's going to kind of replace Stone for the rest of the regular season. It's a win for Washington because they get rid of his salary and they kind of move on from a guy that just really hasn't panned out down there in D.C. And then it's a win for Mantha because things haven't panned out for him this season. Things have not gone well for him in Washington. And now he gets a fresh start somewhere like Vegas, which is, I would say, probably one of the better places to get traded to. Winning the Stanley Cup last year, the fact that it's Las Vegas, right? So there's a lot of things going for Anthony Mantha, and I think this is a really good opportunity for him. And again, come playoff time, this is another guy that we're starting to see now, especially as we get into the middle of March and April, toward the end of the regular season. You start to see the tough guys really start to show their importance and prominence. And you start to see the teams like the last couple of years, Toronto Maple Leaf teams, that didn't have that really start to struggle because those big guys that are tough to play against, the Tom Wilsons, the Matt Martins, the Matthew Rempe's, those type of players start to play a more prominent role. And Mantha is kind of one of those players, right? And that's really what I like about Mantha here, right? This is, come playoff time, this is the type of guy you like to have around. You like having the guys that can score goals, absolutely, but you like having the guys like Mantha too. Those are just as important, and if not more important, because Vegas already has a lot of guys that can score goals. They do have that in bunches. Can they also add that other little sandpaper to the lineup? And they definitely did that with that trade. Obviously, the biggest addition at the deadline was Noah Hanifin, and especially with losing some of the defensemen we talked about in this video already, losing a guy like Alec Martinez, I would say that Hanifin is a big upgrade over Alec Martinez, and not a slouch against Martinez, but I think we can all agree we'd rather have Noah Hanifin in there, right? He slots in on the top pair with Pietrangelo, huge pickup there, and that completely changes everything for the Golden Knights blue line, because not only does that give you that number 1 spot with Hanifin there, but now it pushes guys further down on the second and third pair, probably more where they should realistically be for a team that has Stanley Cup championship aspirations like the Golden Knights. So this is a great situation for Hanifin. It's a great situation for the Golden Knights, and I'm sure Alex Pietrangelo is pretty happy to have Noah Hanifin alongside him on this blue line. And I think it's a good thing because it's going to make a little bit it's going to take a little bit of the pressure off Pietrangelo, right? We've talked about this for probably really since Pietrangelo got to Vegas. It almost feels like sometimes he's maybe overcompensating playing blue line, right? He plays a ton of minutes, and sometimes he doesn't necessarily trust his line mates to the point where he overcompensates and maybe will jump up or pinch on a play where he shouldn't, and then it ends up costing him, and it makes a mistake that he made that if he trusted his guys, he would have been in the right position. And I think that adding guys like Hanifin take away some of that from a guy like Pietrangelo and eases some of the pressure on him, right? And I think that with what we've seen from this Vegas Golden Knights team is they are very capable of winning another Stanley Cup. And maybe the standings don't necessarily reflect that right now, but this is a team that knows we've done this before, right? We won the Stanley Cup last year. Maybe our regular season isn't as high and as good this year, but how many times have we seen teams, boat race through the regular season, win the President's Trophy, and then completely flame out round one of the playoffs? It's happened so many times. So I think it's the best thing for the Golden Knights to not worry about, should we, do we want to be the first or second seed? The second you start getting caught up in that stuff is when you get into actually more trouble. And by the time the playoffs come around, you're too busy worrying about things that don't really matter, right? Just worry about getting into the playoffs. Focus on what you have to do. The Golden Knights are playing playoff hockey already, and all those teams in the Eastern and Western Conference that are kind of like not 1 or 2 or even 3 seed in their division, they're thinking, oh shit, we need to focus on making sure we get to the dance and punch our ticket before we worry about, well, do we want to sit at that table or this table, or that chair is more comfy than that one? You get what I'm saying, right? You're focusing on the intangibles more so than you're focusing on the floofy stuff that doesn't really matter. And teams get caught up in that, and they end up not doing so well in the playoffs because they're worried about that stuff, right? And hopefully you guys like that little analogy, right? But, it's all about getting to the dance. It's all about getting to the ball first. And that's where the Golden Knights are at right now. And I think that, Bruce Cassidy might not be saying that out loud as long as they make the playoffs. He doesn't care. But I think this is a natural motivator for his team. It's, guys, we are not good enough. We need to make the playoffs. We need to do this, this, and this. It's a lot harder to do that when a team is, like Vancouver right now, running away with the division and everything's going dandy. It's hard to motivate those guys and keep them going through the regular season, right? It's human nature to get complacent. And I think that for Vegas, this is the best spot for this team right now. With that said, like I said, looking at the remainder of their schedule, it is pretty favorable. Like, I think a lot of teams would be happy to have the Golden Knights schedule down the stretch and have a little bit of comfort in that, right? New Jersey's probably not a playoff team. Tampa is. Seattle and Columbus are not. St. Louis and Nashville, they're Jekyll and Hyde. You might get a really good version or a really bad version of either of those teams in the Central. Then you've got Winnipeg and Minnesota. Minnesota has not been very good this year. Winnipeg has been very good. And then, with Winnipeg, then you play 2 games against Vancouver within 3 games of each other. That's going to be a really tough stretch, right? You have Arizona thrown in there, but you have Winnipeg and Vancouver. You play those guys 3 times in 5 games. That's going to be a difficult week. That's going to be a difficult week for the Vegas Golden Knights and a real test for them going down the stretch. And like I said, then you play Edmonton and Colorado. Those are good teams. But then in those final 5 games, you play Minnesota, Chicago, and Anaheim. Those three of your final 4 games against teams that you really have to beat. Those are 6 points that the Golden Knights have to have down the stretch. And whether that means maybe they're fighting for home ice advantage, right? Maybe they're competing with Edmonton or LA for that second spot in the Pacific Division, or they're worried about playing for their playoff lives. Who knows? I think right now, it's more so the first of the latter. More so than the latter. I think that they're going to be a playoff team. I'm not really concerned about Vegas necessarily making the playoffs. It's more so where they're going to sit. And I think right now, if I'm the Golden Knights and a fan of the Golden Knights, I'm okay with where they sit. I'm not necessarily, thrilled. Yeah, of course you want them to be toward the top, right? But I think this is a good spot for them. As long as they make the playoffs, things will be okay for the Golden Knights. I really like this team on paper. And they're a type of team that, maybe the stats haven't been perfect for them this year, right? Goals for, 14th in the league. That's right the middle of the pack. Goals against, 12th in the league. Again, right toward the middle of the pack. So nothing super, something glaring off the charts that they are so good at, but it doesn't matter. Do what you have to do during the regular season. Just make it and worry about everything else. It'll all take care of itself in the playoffs. So guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully you like this one. Hopefully you guys like some of the trades that the Golden Knights made at the deadline. I think they did fairly well. A lot of people will say, well, we would have liked Buchnevich or Gensel. And yes, you know what? I'm sure 31 other teams were thinking the exact same thing. That's just kind of how it works, right? But let me know what you guys think of the Golden Knights. Did they do enough at the deadline to go on a legit playoff run this year? Let me know your guys' thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.